She had worked at the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel for 3 years. 3 years of arriving early. 3 years of never missing a shift. 3 years of smiling through insults, swallowing tears in the bathroom, and telling herself that hard work would speak for itself. Then one morning the new CEO walked in, looked her up and down, and said 7 words that would change everything. "We don't need your kind here anymore." Her name was Sandra. She was from Ghana. She had dreams. She had dignity. And standing at the back of that hotel lobby, watching quietly, saying nothing yet, was a man whose name made the entire Korean business world go silent when it was spoken. He had seen everything. And he never forgot a thing. The Grand Seoul Palace Hotel stood at the heart of Gangnam like a crown jewel. 40 floors of glass and steel. A rooftop restaurant that charged more for one meal than most people earned in a month. Chandeliers that cost more than entire apartments. Everything about the place whispered money. And Sandra Mensah swept its floors. She had come from Accra, Ghana, on a scholarship that ended too soon and a dream that refused to die. When the scholarship ran out after her 2nd year of university, she did not go home. Going home meant admitting defeat, and Sandra had not crossed an ocean to admit defeat. She found a room in a small apartment shared with 4 other Africans, 2 Nigerians, 1 Cameroonian, and a Kenyan woman named Afia who became her closest friend. She found work at the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel through a staffing agency, and she showed up every single day like her life depended on it. Because it did. Her job was simple: keep the lobby looking like a magazine photograph at all times. Greet guests with a warm smile. Assist with bags when needed. Make sure the flower arrangements on the reception tables were always fresh. Refill the complimentary fruit tray. Small things. Invisible things. But Sandra did them with a care that was not invisible to everyone. Mr. Park Sung-jin, the hotel's general manager, had noticed her in her first month. Not in a romantic way. Mr. Park was a quiet, principled man in his late 50s who had run the hotel for 22 years. He noticed her the way a craftsman notices another craftsman. There was attention in how she worked. There was pride. When she arranged the flowers, she did not just drop them in the vase. She studied the space. She considered the light. She made something beautiful. "That girl," he told his assistant once, "works like the hotel belongs to her." Over 3 years, Sandra had become more than a lobby attendant. She had learned enough Korean to hold basic conversations with guests. She had memorized the names and preferences of the hotel's regular visitors. She knew that Mr. Choi from room 1204 preferred his newspaper folded on the left side. She knew that the Japanese businesswoman who came every second Thursday liked the hydrangeas placed closer to the window. She knew things nobody asked her to know, because knowing them meant she could make people feel seen. The senior staff respected her quietly. The other attendants looked to her when they were unsure. She had never asked for a title. She had simply become someone people leaned on. She sent money home every month. Her younger brother James was in his 2nd year of secondary school. Her mother sold vegetables at the Makola market in Accra. Every time Sandra wired money, her mother would call and say the same thing: "Sandra, when are you coming home?" And Sandra would say, "Soon, Mama." Not yet. But soon. She was not just working. She was building something. She believed that. Then the new CEO arrived and everything she had built was put on a table and swept onto the floor like crumbs. His name was Kwon Dae-hyun. He was 41 years old, the youngest CEO the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel had ever had. He came from a family with money, old money, the kind that had been sitting in vaults for 2 generations and now moved through boardrooms with a sense of permanent entitlement. He had been appointed by the hotel's parent company after the previous CEO retired, and from the moment he walked through the lobby doors on his first morning, it was clear that he intended to put his stamp on everything. He walked through the hotel the way a man walks through a property he just bought at an auction. Surveying, calculating, already deciding what to keep and what to throw away. Mr. Park walked beside him, introducing staff members as they passed. Kwon Dae-hyun barely acknowledged most of them. He was looking at the walls, the furniture, the aesthetic. Then he saw Sandra. She was arranging the morning flowers on the reception table, her back straight, her uniform neat, humming something quietly to herself. She looked up when she sensed someone approaching and gave her usual warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Grand Seoul Palace." Kwon Dae-hyun stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, not the way Mr. Park looked at her, not with recognition or respect. He looked at her the way someone looks at a misplaced piece of furniture. "What department is she in?" he asked Mr. Park. Not to Sandra. To Mr. Park. As if Sandra were not standing right there. "Lobby services," Mr. Park said carefully. "Sandra has been with us for 3 years. She's one of our I see. Kwon cut him off. His voice was flat. Final. He walked on. Sandra watched him go. She told herself it was nothing. New bosses were always like this, cold at first, businesslike. He would warm up. They always did. She was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Kwon Dae-hyun began making changes. Some of them made sense. He upgraded the kitchen equipment, renegotiated supplier contracts, introduced a new digital check-in system. But other changes had a different quality to them. He removed 2 of the African and Southeast Asian staff members from their public-facing roles, reassigning them to back-of-house positions. He hired 3 new lobby attendants, all Korean, all young, all selected from an agency that specifically served high-end hospitality brands. He told Mr. Park he was elevating the hotel's image. Mr. Park said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Sandra kept working. She told Afia about the changes one evening over a meal of jollof rice that Afia had cooked on their tiny stove. Just keep your head down, Afia said. Do your work. People like that get bored of their own cruelty eventually. I'm not doing anything wrong, Sandra said. I know, Afia said. That's the problem. When you're doing everything right and it still doesn't matter, that's when you know the problem isn't you. Sandra nodded slowly. She didn't feel better. But she went back to work the next morning anyway. 2 weeks later, Kwon Dae-hyun called her into his office. The office was large and had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Seoul skyline. Sandra stood in front of the desk with her hands folded in front of her, the way she had been taught to stand in professional settings, composed, respectful, dignified. Kwon Dae-hyun did not invite her to sit. He was looking at a document when she entered and he took his time before acknowledging her. When he finally looked up, there was nothing in his eyes. Not dislike, not contempt, just nothing. The blank, impersonal look of someone who has already made a decision and is now simply delivering it. We are restructuring the lobby services team, he said. Yes, sir, Sandra said. I understand there have been some changes. I've been trying to adapt to. You're being let go. Sandra heard the words, but for a second they did not arrange themselves into meaning. I'm sorry? Your contract is being terminated. You'll receive your final payment and a termination letter by end of day. Sandra felt something cold move through her chest. 3 years. 3 years of arriving early. 3 years of learning the language. 3 years of knowing every regular guest by name and preference. 3 years of making that lobby beautiful. May I ask why? She said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Kwon Dae-hyun looked at her with the same blank expression. We are redefining the brand image of this hotel. He paused. Then he said the 7 words that Sandra would hear in her sleep for months afterward. We don't need your kind here anymore. The room was very quiet. Sandra stood still. She did not cry. She would cry later, in the bathroom of the apartment she shared, with Afia's arms around her and the sound of the city coming through the window. But not here. Not in front of this man. I understand, she said quietly. She walked out of the office, collected her things from her locker, said goodbye to the colleagues who were nearby, and walked through the lobby for the last time. She paused at the flower arrangement on the reception table, the one she had spent careful minutes on that very morning, and looked at it for just a moment. Then she walked out of the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel. She did not know that someone had been watching the whole time. She did not know that the man sitting in one of the lobby armchairs, the broad-shouldered man in the quiet charcoal suit who had been reading a newspaper for the past 40 minutes, had heard every word of what happened. Not from inside the office, but from the 2 members of his own staff who moved invisibly through the hotel on his behalf. She did not know his name. She did not know that his name, spoken in certain circles in Seoul, caused powerful men to straighten their backs and choose their words carefully. His name was Jang Mi-ho. And he had just become very, very interested in the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel. To understand who Jang Mi-ho was, you first had to understand what he was not. He was not the kind of man who appeared in newspapers. He did not attend charity galas or give interviews or post photographs on social media. He did not need to. The people who mattered knew who he was, and the people who didn't know were either too small to matter or would find out soon enough when it became relevant. He was 46 years old. He had been born in a poor district of Incheon, the second son of a factory worker who died when Mi-ho was 11 and a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep her boys fed. He had built his empire, and that was not too large a word for it, through a combination of fearless intelligence, absolute loyalty to the people who were loyal to him, and a code of conduct that he had lived by since he was a young man. You never ever disrespect someone who does honest work with dignity. He had started in the shadows as was the way in his world. The business he ran had legitimate faces, construction, logistics, hospitality investment, and less visible ones that he did not discuss publicly. But what distinguished Jang Mi-ho from others in his world was a reputation for one thing above all else. When he said something would happen, it happened. When he promised protection, he protected. When he promised consequences, consequences followed. He had been at the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel that morning because his organization was quietly considering a significant investment in the property. He had come alone, not in the sense that he was without security, his people were simply less visible than most, to observe the hotel's operations firsthand. He sat in the lobby for over an hour watching the staff, watching how guests were treated, watching how the machine ran. He had watched Sandra work. He had watched with the attention of a man who noticed things that other people dismissed. He saw how she moved. He saw the small acts, the quick rearrangement of a misplaced chair before a guest could trip, the fresh glass of water she brought unprompted to an elderly visitor who looked tired, the way she directed a confused foreign tourist to the right elevator with clear and patient instructions. He saw a person who was excellent at their work and knew it without being arrogant about it. Then he watched Kwon Dae-hyun arrive and move through the lobby with the cold survey of a man who had already decided to rearrange everything. And then his contact inside the hotel had relayed what happened in the office. "We don't need your kind here anymore." Jang Mi-ho sat with those words for a long moment. He folded his newspaper. He stood. He buttoned his jacket with the calm, deliberate movements of a man who was in no hurry because he knew that time worked in his favor. He made one phone call on his way to his car. "Find out everything you can about the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel's parent company. Ownership structure. Debt positions. Upcoming contracts. Everything." Then he made a second call. "I want to know about a staff member who was let go this morning. Ghanaian woman. First name Sandra. I want her address and I want someone to check that she's all right." He did not know Sandra. He owed her nothing. He simply could not walk past a wrong without filing it somewhere, and the things he filed had a way of coming back around. The week after she lost her job was the hardest week of Sandra's life since arriving in Korea. She applied for unemployment support. She registered with 2 staffing agencies. She updated her resume and sent it to 11 hotels across Seoul. She did all the right things, the sensible things, and she did them with the same discipline that had characterized every other part of her adult life. But at night, when the apartment was quiet and Afia was asleep, Sandra lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and felt something she had never quite let herself feel before. The specific, crushing weight of being dismissed without reason. Not fired for poor performance. Not let go because of budget cuts. Dismissed because of what she looked like. She called her mother. "Sandra." Her mother's voice was warm across the distance. "You sound tired, my daughter." "I'm fine, Mama." "You are not fine. A mother knows." "What happened?" Sandra told her. Not all of it, she softened the edges, took out the most painful parts. But her mother was quiet for a long time after Sandra finished speaking. "Sandra," she said finally. "Yes, Mama." "Do you remember what your grandmother used to say?" Sandra smiled despite herself. "Which one?" "She said many things. She said, when someone disrespects you, they are showing you who they are. When you remain dignified, you are showing them who you are. You were dignified, yes?" "Yes, Mama." "Then you have already won the most important part." Her mother's voice was firm. "The rest will come." Sandra did not entirely believe it. But she held on to it. 3 days after her termination, there was a knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, a neatly dressed young woman stood there, holding an envelope. "Excuse me, are you Sandra Mensah?" Sandra frowned. "Yes." "Who are you?" "My name is Yoon Ji-soo. I work as a personal assistant. I have been asked to deliver this to you." She held out the envelope and left before Sandra could ask another question. Inside the envelope was a single card. On one side was the address of a restaurant, a very well-known restaurant. Sandra recognized the name, the kind of place where reservations took months. On the other side were 5 handwritten words. "Watch. Tomorrow. 1 p.m. Come alone." There was no name. No number. Sandra stood in her doorway and stared at the card for a full minute. Then she called Afia over and showed it to her. "I would not go," Afia said. "I'm going," Sandra said. The restaurant was on the 14th floor of a building in Uedo, with windows that ran from floor to ceiling and a view of the Han River that made the entire city look peaceful. Sandra arrived at 12:58. She wore her best dress, a deep green wrap dress she had bought with her first month's salary from the hotel and saved for important occasions. She asked for the reservation and was led immediately to a corner table by the window. The man was already there. He rose when she approached. she noticed that the small but clear courtesy of a man standing when a woman arrived at the table. He was broad-shouldered and had a calm face that seemed to have been arranged by long habit into an expression of controlled patience. He looked like a man for whom surprises were rare. "Miss Mensah," he said. "Thank you for coming. My name is Jang Miho. Please sit." They sat. The waiter poured water. For a moment neither of them spoke. "You don't know me?" Jang Miho said. "No," Sandra agreed. She had not found anything useful when she searched his name. The results were sparse, which she had learned often meant the person was either very private or very powerful. "I was in the lobby of the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel the morning you were dismissed," he said. "I heard about what Mr. Kwon said to you." Sandra's jaw tightened slightly. "I see. I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer might be strange." He looked at her steadily. "How are you?" It was such a plain question. Such an ordinary question. Nobody had asked her that with such directness since it happened because everyone around her was so focused on being helpful, on giving advice on the practical next steps, that the actual question of how are you had somehow been left out. Sandra looked at this stranger across the table, and to her own surprise she told him the truth. "I'm angry," she said. "I did everything right. I gave that hotel 3 years. I learned the language. I learned every guest's name. I cared about that place like it was mine. And I was dismissed with 7 words that had nothing to do with my work." Jang Miho nodded slowly. "And I'm scared," she continued because she had started now and the words were coming. "I have a mother in Accra who depends on me. I have a brother in school. I have rent due in 3 weeks. And I'm sitting in a restaurant across from a stranger who somehow knows my name and my address and I don't know why." "That's a fair concern," he said. He leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you why I asked you here." He paused as if choosing his words with care. "My organization has been considering a significant investment in the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel, acquiring a major ownership stake from the parent company. That process is now moving forward." He looked at her. "I want you to come back to that hotel. Not as a lobby attendant. As director of guest experience." Sandra stared at him. "That is a senior management position," she said carefully. "It is. I don't have a management degree. You have 3 years of building systems that senior managers with degrees couldn't replicate. I had my people review your performance record at the hotel after I learned your name. Every quarter review without exception was excellent. The guest feedback forms reference you by name more than any other staff member in that building." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm not interested in people who have certificates that say they can do things. I'm interested in people who actually do them." Sandra was quiet for a long moment. "What about Mr. Kwon?" she asked. Something in Jang Miho's expression shifted. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just the small, controlled adjustment of a man who had already mapped the entire road ahead. "Mr. Kwon's position is being reviewed," he said simply. They ordered food. They talked. About the hotel, about Sandra's ideas for guest engagement, about what genuine luxury service actually meant. Sandra found herself speaking with confidence she hadn't realized she had, and Jang Miho listened with the focused attention of someone who was actually hearing what she was saying. At the end of lunch, before they rose from the table, he said, "I want to be honest with you about something." "Please," Sandra said. "I'm not a simple man. The world I operate in has many layers and not all of them are visible. I'm not asking you to be part of those layers. I am asking you to do the job you were born to do, in a building where someone once told you that you didn't belong. That is all." He looked at her evenly. "But I want you to make that decision with full information, not with false impressions." Sandra looked back at him for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. She accepted the offer. The day Sandra walked back into the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel, she dressed with deliberate care. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a cream blouse. Her shoes were leather, a pair she had bought years ago and kept polished. Her name badge, which had been prepared by the hotel's new administration team, read, "Sandra Mensah, Director of Guest Experience." She arrived at 8:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the formal workday began, because Sandra had always been the kind of person who arrived early. The lobby staff who had known her, the ones who had watched her walk out 3 weeks earlier, turned when she came through the doors. There was a moment of collective stillness. Then Hyun-ji, a young lobby attendant who had cried when Sandra left, covered her mouth with both hands. "Yuni," she whispered. The Korean word for an older sister figure she trusted. Sandra smiled at her. "Good morning, Hyun-ji." She walked through the lobby with steady steps. She stopped at the reception flower arrangement. The flowers that morning had been placed in the predictable way, symmetrical, correct, but without character. She made 3 adjustments. The lobby looked better immediately. Then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. The meeting was already in progress when she arrived. The parent company's representatives were there. Jang Mi-ho's legal and financial team were present. And Kwon Dae-hyun was there, sitting at the head of the table with the look of a man who had not yet fully understood that the ground beneath his chair had already shifted. He saw Sandra walk in and his expression went through several rapid changes. Confusion first. Then something harder. "What is she doing here?" he said, looking at the room at large. One of the parent company representatives, a woman named Director Oh, looked at him with an expression of careful neutrality. "Ms. Mensah has been appointed Director of Guest Experience effective this week, in alignment with the new ownership structure." "That's not possible," Kwon said. "I terminated her contract." "That contract termination has been reviewed," Director Oh said. "The grounds were found to be insufficient and the decision has been reversed and superseded by the new appointment." Kwon Dae-hyun looked at the faces around the table. Nobody looked back at him the way he was used to people looking at him, deferential, waiting for his lead. They were looking at him like a problem that had already been solved. "I am still the CEO of this hotel," he said. The room was quiet. Jang Mi-ho, who had been sitting at the far end of the table without speaking since Sandra entered, looked up from the document in front of him. He spoke quietly, almost gently, but with the particular weight of a man who never needed to raise his voice because he had never needed to. "Mr. Kwon," he said, "you will regret the decisions you made in this building. Not because of anything I will do to you, but because in 10 years when you look back at your career and wonder where it turned, you will understand that the day you looked at an excellent person and dismissed her for reasons that had nothing to do with her excellence was the day your own integrity failed you." He paused. "That kind of failure is its own consequence." Kwon Dae-hyun sat very still. The meeting continued. By the time it ended, Kwon's position had been formally transitioned. He was not in the building by noon. In the months that followed, Sandra built something at the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel that people in the hospitality industry in Seoul would talk about for years. She did not do it by shouting or by making grand gestures. She did it the way she had always done things, with consistency, with attention, with genuine care for the people she worked with and the guests she served. Her first act as Director of Guest Experience was to call a meeting with every member of the lobby, front desk, concierge and housekeeping teams. Not to announce policies. To listen. She spent 3 hours asking questions and writing down answers. What made their jobs harder than they needed to be? What did guests complain about that could actually be fixed? What small things, if changed, would make the biggest difference? The staff looked at her with the cautious gratitude of people who had been talked at for so long that being genuinely listened to felt unfamiliar. Over the following weeks, she implemented changes that were simple but precise. She redesigned the guest welcome protocol so that returning visitors were recognized by name within seconds of entering. She created a system for tracking guest preferences, not intrusive but thoughtful, so that a guest who had mentioned once that they were allergic to lilies would never arrive to a room with lilies on the table. She introduced a brief daily briefing for lobby staff, not about rules but about each other, who needed support that day, who had something to celebrate. The hotel's guest satisfaction scores, which had been declining steadily under Kwon's rebranding, began to rise. Slowly at first, then faster. Within 4 months, the Grand Seoul Palace had its highest review ratings in 7 years. International travel publications noticed. One described the hotel's extraordinary transformation in guest culture, and named Sandra in a feature article about the new generation of hospitality leadership in Asia. Her mother called when the article was shared in their family WhatsApp group. Sandra. Her voice was different now, bigger, warmer, overflowing with something that words in any language are too small to hold. The article says your picture. I'm looking at your picture. You are wearing a blazer. Sandra laughed. It's a nice blazer, Mama. Your grandmother would have said something very proud right now. What would she have said? Her mother thought for a moment. She would have said, see? The ground was always yours. You just had to stand on it long enough. Sandra was quiet for a moment. She was sitting in the office that had once belonged to Kwon Dae-hyun. The Seoul skyline was in the window, the same skyline that had watched all of this happen. Tell James to study hard, she said finally. I'm going to need someone smart in the family to keep up with me. Her mother laughed so loudly that Sandra had to hold the phone away from her ear. 6 months after Sandra returned to the Grand Seoul Palace Hotel, Jang Mi-ho came to stay. Not as an investor meeting. Not as a business visit. He booked a room, A standard room, not a suite, which surprised the reservations team enough that they checked twice, and he spent 2 nights in the hotel simply as a guest. On the evening of his first day, Sandra was informed that he had requested a brief meeting. She found him in the lobby restaurant at a table near the window. He was eating alone and reading as he seemed to often do. She sat across from him. "How is everything?" she asked. He looked up. "Remarkable," he said simply. He looked around the lobby, the effortless movement of staff, the way every guest seemed to be in the right place, the quality of quiet that a genuinely well-run space has. "You did this." "My team did this," Sandra said. He nodded slowly. He seemed genuinely pleased. Not in the way of a man checking on an investment, in the way of a man who had believed something would work and was satisfied to have been right about it. "I want to tell you something," he said. "The morning I saw you in this lobby, when you still worked here the first time, I watched you for about 40 minutes before Quan arrived. I had come to observe the hotel, but I ended up observing you." 40 minutes is a long time," Sandra said. "You helped 9 different people in 40 minutes, he said. Without being asked. Without looking to see if anyone was watching. Without hesitation." He set his book down. "In my world I have met a great many people who perform their values when there is an audience. You lived yours when you thought nobody was looking. That is rare. That is the thing worth protecting." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "You didn't know me. You had no reason to get involved." He was quiet for a beat. "My mother worked 3 jobs, he said. She cleaned hotel rooms like this one for 14 years. She was excellent at her job. She was never recognized for it." He looked at the table for a moment. "I could not go back and give her recognition. But when I see someone excellent being dismissed for reasons that have nothing to do with their excellence, I find I am not capable of doing nothing." The restaurant hummed quietly around them. Outside the window, Seoul was beginning its evening, lights coming on across the skyline, traffic moving in the distance, the great ordinary miracle of a city continuing. "Thank you," Sandra said. "For seeing me." "Thank you," Jang Mi-ho said, "for being worth seeing." They finished their meal and said their good nights. Sandra walked back through the lobby, past the flower arrangement she had taught her team to do with attention and care, past the front desk where Hyunji was handling a check-in with the warmth and precision Sandra had modeled for her, past the concierge desk where a new hire was patiently helping a tourist with directions. She paused at the lobby doors and looked back at the space she had built. Or rather, the space she had helped people build together. 3 years ago she had polished these floors. Now she ran this house. And she had not changed who she was to do it. Not for a single day. The way you treat people who can do nothing for you is the most honest picture of who you are. Kwon Dae-hyun did not lose his position because of a powerful man's intervention. He lost it because he had spent his whole career making decisions from a place of pride instead of principle, and structures built on pride have no real foundation. The fall was always coming. He simply chose Sandra's dignity as the moment to begin it. Sandra did not rise because someone saved her. She rose because she had spent 3 years becoming someone worth rising. The kindness that came to her was not luck. It was drawn to her by the quality of who she was. And Jang Mi-ho, a man from hard beginnings who had built real power in the world, never forgot where power came from and never confused it with worth. He understood something that many people in his position forget. Authority is borrowed but character is owned. Do your work with excellence, treat every person with dignity, and let your integrity speak louder than anyone's opinion of you. The right people are always watching. And the right people always remember.